Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Paula McCain. I'm one of the senior business advisors here at the North Central Texas Small Business Development Center. Don't know if you were aware, today is National Lemon Meringue Pie Day, and I am really good with that. The SBDC is the leading provider of assistance for small businesses. We are grant funded, and because of that, we can bring our services to you at no cost. Today's webinar is how to approach and identify the right tax preparer for you, presented by Bryce Forney. We will be recording this session and the recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Today's webinar will be interactive, so please feel free to raise your hand, put a question in the chat that's going to be monitored, or unmute yourself if you have a question for Bryce. Let me tell you a bit about Bryce. He is a Bay Area sole prop CPA preparing tax returns, mostly for business owners who use CloudBooks for their business. He's an understandable, likable, mobile accountant working in hotel lobbies, libraries, and liquid spaces. Thanks, Bryce, for joining us. And please tell me what a liquid space is.
Sure thing. That's just a service that allows you to get access to like spare office space. So it's a way to rent office space, but on the fly, and you don't know where you're going to be. You can just pick a zip code and get space. So
Well, that's cool.
yeah, it's pretty neat. So do you want to go me to go ahead and share?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Take it away.
Great. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so hopefully you can see the screen now.
Yep.
TAC is always the most difficult part of a presentation like this. So today I want you to get comfortable with what you're looking for in a tax preparer and what the tax preparer market looks like, and then some ideas around how you can best find the tax preparer that meets your needs. This is not a topic that is natively known, and I think it's important because a lot of tax preparers are not natural born marketers. So the whole industry can get sort of clouded in that fact. So the SBDC is a resource for everyone. So just be aware of the SBDC being available to you. It's an outstanding resource. It provides education like this, as well as lots more resources. So that's important to call out. Just so that you know about me, I am a CPA. I prepare tax returns for business owners. I'm a advanced certified QuickBooks Pro advisor, and I'm more involved in the books than other tax preparers. There are some tax preparers who want nothing to do with someone's books. They think about it as the tax return is really separate from the books. I don't see it that way, but it's a fair point. We can have different preparers in the market. So I just wanted you to know that I am in tune with client books. So I think the first thing that's the most important thing when you're looking for a tax preparer, and most small business owners use a professional tax preparer. That's the point at which somebody goes from maybe self-preparing to using a professional. There are changes in circumstances that can, home ownership, that sort of thing, that can cause someone to go to a professional preparer from preparing themselves. And then having a business, I think it's the old statistic, but I don't think it has changed very much. About 90% of business owners end up using a professional tax preparer because of just the complexity that reporting a business adds to a tax return. So when you think about what's important to you in terms of using someone to prepare your tax return, it's necessarily an inefficient process because you have to take all of the information that you have about your business and your other tax documents and communicate those to the third party preparer. So just the nature of the beast means that you're going to be uh, transmitting this information. So I feel it's really important to find someone that you vibe well with, that has processes that make sense to you and that works well with how you want to prepare your return. So some important questions are listed here. Is it important to you that you file your return on time? The original tax filing deadline that we're now back to is April 15th. So for a business that, for a C Corp or an S Corp, an incorporated business, the deadlines are different. But assuming you're a sole proprietor, the deadline for filing is April 15th. So if your desire is to file timely, that's an important thing to note because some preparers will be glad to take you on if you do not want to file timely. That may sound counterintuitive, but for a lot of preparers, because it's a seasonal business, they actually might be more willing to accept a prospect who is willing to file after the due date. So that's a big determinant right there. And then another question is how high touch you want to be with your tax preparer. Do you want to physically go and meet, hand off your documents, talk about your business before the return is prepared, as it's being prepared, or after it's done? Do you want a summary and to go over the tax return details? Or do you just not want to be involved? There's a term that I learned called "do it for me." There's basically three different kind of client types when it comes to tax return preparation. There's do it yourself, where you're using a self-prepared tax application. There's do it with me, where you're using a professional in some capacity, but maybe you ultimately are going to pull the trigger on filing, or maybe the tax preparer is, but you're highly involved in getting the information into the tax app. And then the third bucket is the do it for me, and that's the market in which I operate. And so maybe you can just think about where you sit on that spectrum. There are, I've learned over time, there are some stereotypes that are accurate about business owners based on what type of business they are. Never would I mention those stereotypes, of course, but there are some business types that are really more likely to let a tax preparer handle everything and really just try to be involved as little as possible. So if that's you, that's important to document because the tax preparer is going to want to know that. Some tax preparers actually won't take on a client unless they know that client is going to be really involved in the process. So that's an important characteristic for you to document. And I think documenting these elements are critical to you being able to find the right tax preparer because often prospects who are looking for a tax preparer can be, I guess, frustrated in the market because it's not so well defined. Like grocery stores are really well defined. You can have a high-end grocery store. Around here we have Whole Foods and Draeger's. You can have a middle point of like a Safeway. I'm in California, I'm in the Bay Area, by the way. Um, or you can have a discount grocery store like Grocery Outlet, very well-defined market. Tax preparation is not that way. Well, actually, it is that way, but it's not really clear when you're looking for a tax preparer. It's sometimes difficult to tell where a tax preparer is in the market. There are some tax preparers who do a tremendous volume of tax returns, like one individual tax preparer doing 1,500 returns during the year. That's a tremendous volume. And because of that, most of the tax returns are probably very, very simple. Wages, interest, done. And the idea there is that they're like the classic thing, making up the profit on volume. So that's going to be a low price, high volume option. And then there are other tax preparers who may specify, I only work in a certain industry, or like me, I only work with business owners who are using cloud books. So it's important to think about where you are and how you want to transmit the information, whether you're going to have a meeting, whether how payment is going to work and how much you're willing to pay. I alluded to the what would be a tax shop in our realm, and it's important, believe it or not, for you to decide how much are you willing to pay for tax return preparation. And I will say, unfortunately, the market of tax preparers can, like the prices, can vary wildly. And I will also admit that it's not perfected in the sense that you can end up paying a high price and get service that does not meet your needs. You can end up paying a low price and get outstanding service. For example, if somebody's starting out, they may not have a tremendous amount of experience, but if they have enough to work with you, that can be a real win-win. So I just want you to be aware that this professional market is, I suppose it's perfected in the sense that there are a lot of options out there. There's a lot of competition, but it's still working out its details. Still, a lot of tax preparers are pricing by the hour as opposed to a flat price for the tax returns. I happen to do flat pricing. I find that easier for me, and then the client knows what the amount of money that's going to change hands for doing the tax return. They know that. So you want to decide really what you're willing to pay, because that that's going to determine a lot. And then I think it's helpful to call out what is not going to work for you when you're working with a tax preparer. So I have had some prospects who insist on having a tax meeting. Most of the time, I'll accommodate a few tax meetings, but generally, I'm not a tax meeting type preparer. I prepare all the returns myself, and part of the flip side of that is I don't have a tremendous amount of time to meet or talk, especially during tax season. So if you've got a bugaboo about, or you've got concerns about the security and privacy of your tax documentation, that's an important thing to consider as well. If you walk into a tax preparation office and this doesn't happen much anymore, but if you see a bunch of paper lying around and you're seeing files move throughout the office, that may give you the heebie-jeebies. So be aware of that. This is the tax preparer is going to be taking your information and holding on to it. So I think it's important to ask about security just in general, and certainly if you have specific concerns about privacy or security. And we'll talk later about the types of preparers that are out there, which will also help in this decision. So the final thing I want to highlight here is to consider whether there are elements of tax preparation for which you are willing to pay a premium. And I'm aware that considering paying a premium on top of whatever the price is for a tax return may just be blasphemy to you. But in the market, a tax preparer might be looking for, like, I'll only take you on as a client if you're willing to do mid-year check-ins, and the price for that service is, $2,000 a quarter or whatever the price is determined. So, or you may be willing to pay more to be able to have your tax return turned around in a few days or a week, because a lot of times people can drop off their information or transmit their information to the tax preparer and end up waiting weeks or feel like they have to follow up with the tax preparer in order to get a response. So responsiveness is a big, now that I mention it, responsiveness is a big concern within the tax preparation market. So I would consider asking the tax preparer about the turnaround time once the tax preparer has your information. So here I wanted to give an example of two different types of clients, because you may be thinking, I'm a business owner, just like any other business owner, and I'm searching to have someone prepare my tax return. How could my situation be any different than any other business owner's situation from the perspective of the tax preparer? So what we have on the left is Rashida, the real estate agent, and uh, Rashida is not into details. She just wants her tax return done. She has trouble answering the questions about, like here last year when asked how many miles she drove for her business, she answered, "Well, just use the standard amount for aggressive taxpayers, or just use the most amount of miles." Believe it or not, these are actual instances that can happen. So um, she just refers to everything as her tax stuff. Every time she gets something in the mail that says important tax document enclosed, she just puts it in an envelope. She doesn't even open it up, and it goes off to the tax preparer. So that's one type of client. And then another type of client is Aaliyah, the actuary. And Aaliyah is really tidy. Aaliyah has great handwriting, has really complete notes. Her charitable contributions are always like to the penny, and very well organized. Early, wants to file early, wants to get, typically Aaliyah has a refund, wants to get a refund as early as possible. She likes to go through the organizer and fill that out completely and also send backup spreadsheets. So very organized taxpayer very early on. So both of these client types can be really valuable to a tax preparer. When a tax preparer gets full of business, then the tax preparer will tend to lean towards one or the other. These are two pretty extreme examples, but if a tax preparer is really busy, they may want more of the Aaliyahs because those are going to be really efficient, more profitable, more organized. Or they may want more Rashidas where they can file later in the year. Um, and Rashida is less concerned about, did you get that additional $2 for my charity? Things like that. So I wanted to give you a perspective on different types of tax clients so that you can see how you might be viewed through the lens of a tax preparer. So to give you an idea of what types of tax preparers there are out there in the market, technically, tax preparers need to have a preparer tax identification number, a PTIN, to be authorized to prepare returns. So this is something that the IRS issues to a tax preparer. Believe it or not, you can actually download the complete PTIN list of all of the tax preparers in the country. The IRS makes that available. Um, so really, everyone has a PTIN. If a preparer does not have a PTIN, that is an enormous red flag because this is a base level requirement for professionally filing returns. So in addition to the PTIN, most often the tax preparer will have another designation. So I shouldn't say the most common because that's not really the case. The most commonly known designation that is associated with tax preparation is a certified public accountant, a CPA. So a CPA is licensed by the State Board of Accountancy and has passed the CPA exam, has completed college, and the CPAs have to adhere to a code of conduct related to having the state license. And the reason I mention that is that it means that when you're choosing a CPA, you can feel confident that that CPA is gonna at least is required to conform to the ethics that are required and the business practices that are required as part of maintaining the state license. Another designation that's really common in the industry is an enrolled agent, an EA. This is a license that's actually issued by the IRS, and that means that they have passed the IRS examination. And in my experience with EAs, they are highly technical folks. I'm saying this as a CPA. So EAs are fantastic because when it comes to tax code, they're they're intimately familiar. They have to be able to pass that exam. I keep thinking one of these days I'll take the enrolled agent exam just to see what it's all about. But so that's another designation that's relevant. They don't have a state license. There are some requirements like for continuing education. Um, and there's nothing in the sense of an EA doesn't have to have a college background, but perfect for preparing a tax return. And then finally, there are attorneys who specialize in tax preparation. And this may sound unusual, perhaps, but some attorneys actually, from the get-go, intend to have their law degree and practice tax preparation. Most of these, or I should say, at least a significant portion of the attorneys who prepare tax returns are often in the IRS representation business as well, where their goal is to represent taxpayers who get questions from the IRS, because that's obviously a pretty scary experience for a lot of taxpayers, and there's a need there. So attorneys can be tax preparers where the the kind of the pitch to the prospect is if anything should come up with the IRS questioning your tax return, I can also represent you. I prepared the return. I've already got that information. So those are some of the designations. Just to reiterate, it could be like it is perfectly acceptable for a tax preparer to be a professional tax preparer and just have a PTIN, not have a separate designation. But most commonly in the market, they're going to have another designation. But at a minimum, you want to make sure that you know what your tax preparer's PTIN is, or at least that they have one. So I think it's also helpful for context to know what the market is like out there for tax preparers. These are generalizations. These are typical scenarios for tax preparers. This is not an absolute, but I think these are helpful concepts to keep in mind when you're shopping for a tax preparer. So tax preparation is an exceptionally seasonal business. Most tax returns and the work around tax returns starts in late January and ends in mid-April. So consider, for me, almost all of my revenue is generated in that very short period of time. We're talking a couple of months, basically. So because of that, if you're looking for a tax preparer and it's in the middle of March, that's basically like going into a busy restaurant at 7 p.m. and expecting they have a table. So if you're thinking, I'm ready to find a tax preparer, I've still got a month to go before my tax return is due, and you're contacting preparers and you're not getting any response, it's probably because of that really tight timeline. Now, if you do get a preparer who's available during that time, that's great. But just be aware for many, that's going to be a time, ironically, when the tax preparer is not considering a new business, which is its own separate strange thing about this market. Another thing is that tax preparers are technical folks. So because of that, this is not like shopping for shoes at Macy's. This is not like a tax preparer is going to have a really complete menu most of the time that's easy to discern. Oh, this is where I fit within your practice. Often, tax preparers will have almost no information available on their website. You'll have to contact them. The conversation about how your tax return is going to be prepared may be unclear or challenging to get through. So the what I think is important for a business owner to consider in the interview is to ask specifically, are you able to prepare a return like mine? And do you have the capacity to take on my return for timely filing, or can you file it shortly after the due date? Find out if they can do your return and find out when they can do your return. And of course, find out how much it's going to cost for them to do your return. So there's one thing I thought of on that discussion item. Uh, a lot of prospects want to know two things. They want to know that they're looking for a local tax preparer, and they want a tax preparer who's familiar with their industry. Those are the two things that come up most often. Are you local? And do you work with other businesses in my industry? Do you have expertise? That's a tricky one. Of course, it's understandable that you want someone, if you're an architect, you want a tax preparer who's familiar with architecture. While that's a perfectly reasonable request, in fact, it does not make a difference what your business is. And I know this may come across as a shock, but there is no difference whatsoever between an architect, a sole proprietor architect, and a sole proprietor attorney, and a sole proprietor bakery for that matter. These are all about putting revenue, cost of goods or cost of sales in, and then coming up with net income. I know that can be a lot to take in, but finding someone who has expertise in your industry, I mean, there are some industry specific things, but most of the time for a tax return, it's really not that big of a deal. It makes more sense to find somebody who's got experience with an industry in the bookkeeping arena or with accounting assistance than it does with tax return preparation. So I just want to get that out. I think this is so great to be able to share information with actual prospects, business owners. So I had mentioned about finding out how much a tax return is going to cost. And I want to also mention that some tax preparers, especially those that are charging for tax returns based on time, may actually be unable to give you an estimate or a quote. Even though to me it seems like a tax preparer would know a general range and be able to give you that range, I think we become hesitant to give a range because prospects, when they hear a range, will lock in on the low dollar amount and will have disappointment if it's anything higher than the low in the range. So if you get a range, be prepared for it to be within that, anywhere within that range, and also maybe outside of the range. So pricing is tough. As I mentioned, I charge a flat price, but that's not very common for preparers. I don't know why, but not very common. I think it's because a tax preparer wants to make sure that they're getting paid appropriately for the given complexity of a return. And I've decided that on some returns that are more complex, I'm going to be less profitable on those. And on returns that are less complex, I'm going to be more profitable, and it evens out over time. But I think in the defense of other preparers, that's a perfectly reasonable perspective to take. So one more thing about when you're talking with a preparer, commonly the discussion will center around, can you save me tax? Can you find deductions? And I will say the tax preparation market can also be guilty of more or less advertising. Our objective is to get you the lowest tax possible, to quote unquote find deductions for your business reporting. And while I can understand this perspective, we never want to pay more than we are legally required to pay. And at the same time, it becomes this very questionable line. Because when you think about your business, you have objectively a total amount of revenue, and you have incurred a given amount of expense, and that results in net income. Now, there are some things that don't show up on your profit and loss, mileage, home office expense. There are some things that may get added in, but in general, most of a business's reporting is objective. Not to mention, I will add that the goal of your business should be to make as much money as possible. Now, that may come across as a bit of a surprise because I don't know, in the market of small business, there becomes this folklore that it's a good thing to minimize income and minimize tax. Yeah, if you do that, the ultimate end run, if we take that to its logical terminal point, then you have zero income, zero tax. Is that what you want? I mean, let's say you uh, come up with expenses that are questionable and you can reduce that income number. First of all, you're risking that the IRS is going to have some questions with a high gross, low net business, which is absolutely a red flag. Second, the idea of reporting more income is good because A, it gives you a better opportunity to contribute more to retirement, tax deferred, and B, it allows you to pay the tax and end up with after-tax cash flow. That should be the goal of any business. And I think sometimes, for whatever reason, there's confusion in the market about the goal of a business. So the goal of a business is to make money. You can take that to the bank. And speaking of the bank, by the way, when you go to finance a car, a home, or really perform any lending, being the borrower, the first thing that they're going to look at is how much income have you earned on your tax return. They're not going to accept any other source. They're not going to accept you saying, no, I really made a lot of money. I just added a bunch of questionable expenses on my tax return. The bank is not going to be willing to lend on that. So I want to highlight that, of course, we don't want to pay more than we're legally required, but the objective should always be to make more money so that you can contribute more to retirement, so that you can pay the appropriate tax and end up with more after-tax cash flow. So finally, I want to go through some ideas that now that we've discussed the tax preparation market, discussed what your wants and needs are and your objective in finding a tax preparer. Once you have your needs documented, you're familiar a little bit with what sits out there in terms of tax preparers, when you interview a tax preparer or go to the website of a tax preparer, this is what I think is important to look out for and to ask about. I've noted a few things here. So, uh, as you're talking with a tax preparer, remember that many of us are overwhelmed, even when we have time outside of tax season. We kind of know intuitively that it's not going to translate to having time during tax season. So we may decide we're only going to take on so many new clients because new clients take more time. So I think it's important to ask, can you take me on as a new client? Do you really have capacity to take me on? That's very respectful. I think whether or not it's even relevant to the tax preparer, it'll come across like, in a way, you're almost selling yourself to many tax preparers because of the overwhelmed. I know it's not right. It should be the other way around. But because of how the market is, I think it's helpful to ask whether a tax preparer can take you on, whether they're comfortable with your return, and you may offer your prior year tax return to the prospective tax preparer to get a sense for what your tax return looks like. I have heard this from prospects since the beginning. I've been doing this about 25 years on my own. And the number of times I have heard a prospect say to me, my tax return is pretty simple. So I think it's going to be pretty straightforward. And then it's kind of a red flag actually at this point. So I think it's helpful for you not to assess your tax return because one, it's kind of offensive to the tax preparer that you have familiarity about their about the tax. I mean, of course, you can be familiar with your tax return, but how that fits into the what the tax preparer considers efficient and profitable may be something entirely different. So providing your tax return to your prior year tax return to the tax preparer is their best sense of what they're going to be able to do for you and their best indication about how complex your tax return is. Uh, I don't want to like overstate this, but I think that, like, I'm trying to couch this in respectful terms. I think it's most helpful for you not to do any assessment of the tax return. Leave that to the tax preparer. Right, wrong, or indifferent. I don't know what it adds to the equation for you to tell the tax return preparer whether your return is simple or complex. I just don't know where that fits in. That's what I'm trying to say. So, I think it's important to ask how the information exchange is going to go. Does the tax preparer use an upload site? Do you fill out something online that's really complete where you're actually completing a lot of the details of your tax return on behalf of the tax preparer? Or if it may be something that's your preference may be, I get all the tax documents in the mail and I print out my business P&L and I just want to put it in an envelope and send it to the tax preparer. That's the method that works for me. That's important to ask to the tax preparer, is that going to work for you? So some tax preparers are very specific about they'll only receive information through a specific upload site or through a specific mechanism that you as the client sign up to log in. Other tax preparers are agnostic as to how you're going to communicate the information. And then I think it's helpful to ask the tax preparer that you're considering to use what is the most challenging part of their work. And the reason that I think that this is important is it gives you a sense of whether of what their limitation is. For well-established tax preparers who already have a large base of clients, that tax preparer might say that getting tax returns done is their most challenging part, or getting information. They ask questions and getting that information back to complete the return is their challenge. For someone who's starting out or newer or with still trying to build up their base of business, getting new business may be their limitation. And that tells you, oh, this is someone who's, I mean, I don't want to say that the established tax preparer is less interested in preparing an accurate and complete tax return for you. But I will say someone who's newer or who has fewer clients is necessarily going to have more time to talk with you or to work with you on specific issues. So hearing that a tax preparer's biggest challenge is getting new business, it could be an indication, there's nothing's absolute, but that could be an indication that that's a more high touch tax preparer, at least at that point. And then I think it's important to ask about pricing and payment terms. Is the tax preparer going to send an invoice out at the same time as the tax return? Or are they going to prepare the return? The return's going to get all done, signed, and sent. And then at the end of the month is when the tax preparer is going to send a bill and give you 10 or 15 days to pay that bill. Is payment up front? The moment you come in with your information, that's when you're going to write a check or pay with a credit card, however the payment works. And that's another question about how does the tax preparer allow, excuse me, to be paid by ACH or credit card or check? How is that going to work? And then also asking about the price. And I know I said earlier that asking about price can be tricky, where some tax preparers are going to feel ill-equipped to answer that question. I still think it's an important question to ask. And if you can't get the price, maybe you can find out what are the inputs involved and like walk me through how you will ultimately come up with the price that you charge for my tax return. Let's say we're Rashida, the real estate agent. We couldn't be bothered with details. We're going to just throw a bunch of stuff in an envelope, send it off to the tax preparer, hope for the best. In that scenario, I would expect there are going to be a lot of questions that are coming back. There's a lot of interplay. So if a tax preparer is saying to you as a prospect, well, the way we come up with price is every time we touch a tax return, we make a note of how much time we spend on that return. Then Rashida, the real estate agent, is going to end up with, for the equivalent tax return, Rashida, the real estate agent, is going to end up paying a lot more for her tax return than Aaliyah, the actuary, who's really organized. If time spent working on the return is the basis for preparing the return. So Rashida might want to look for a tax preparer who's charging a flat price, or at least has some idea that isn't based in time spent on the return. Now, of course, somebody could be really efficient and maybe all of Rashida's information is in there. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a tremendously long return. But most of the time with folks that don't delve into the details terribly much, that's going to take more time than someone who's really organized. So those are some ideas around interviewing a tax preparer that you're considering using to prepare your tax return with your business. And there is, just to again highlight, that the SBDC is a resource for you, and the North Central Texas SBDC has a series of events. Among other events, we're going to be talking over these next few months about tax and accounting. So in addition to the other events that are listed on the site, and in addition to the other resources that are available to you, through SBDC. So use the resource. And I'm open to any questions that have arisen during the session or you think of now. Let me know.
So if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or type it in chat. I'm glad that we have Bryce here with this. This is a very interesting topic because you never really know. And just a couple of comments. Um, when we were looking, my husband and I were looking for a tax preparer, it was very important to him that it be somebody familiar with farm and ranch because we have livestock. And I don't know if the person that we eventually hired, um, I don't know if that's something that is actually unique to her business or her expertise or what, but it was just very important. And she's very aware and of what it takes to have livestock and care for them, as well as she's been doing our taxes for so long that she goes, okay, where's the feed for last year? Where is all of this information? So she keeps us honest there.
Yeah, I
Uh,
will say, despite my earlier comments about all businesses being the same, wineries, which are more prevalent here, a little bit north of where I am, livestock, there are certainly some industries where it's super helpful just to have a basic sense of how elements are depreciated, if nothing else. So there are some um, there are some specifics that where it does matter to have someone with the expertise. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
mhm. And Alexandra has a question. She is a professional counselor and opened her own practice as a PLLC. Should she be paying taxes quarterly? What are your recommendations?
So with an LLC, I'm not familiar with PLLC,
That's
but
the professional for someone that has a professional certification of some sort, like a counselor.
yeah, so it really depends. In that scenario, if it's a single member LLC, then the default is that you're going to file a Schedule C with an individual tax return. And in that case, you, for tax purposes, are a sole proprietor. So you will pay estimated taxes. They call it quarterly, but it's really April, June, September, and January. And you might ask, why is it not even quarters? And the reason is we have elections in November, and Congress is the one who's decided when those due dates are. So they don't want you to have an estimated payment during elections, which, you know, Congress.
Mm,
What can you say?
yeah. What are you going to do?
Yeah, exactly. And then in addition, there may be, I'm in California, so California has a separate LLC tax of $800 a year, and then a separate LLC fee based on what revenue is. And so, depending on what state you're in, there may be some state taxes as well.
Mhm.
But so my answer is probably yes, you're going to be required to make estimated tax payments.
Okay. Does that help, Alexandra? She said, yes, thank you
Okay,
very much.
super. Sure thing.
And you were talking about pricing as well. And it's kind of like, what are you willing to pay? And I'll go back to my example.
Yeah.
Seems like our bill gets bigger every year. I don't know
Yeah.
why, but
Well, I can
by
tell you why,
golly,
if you really
tell me
want to
why.
know.
It's expensive, but it's also time consuming for her, and we're willing to pay it.
Yeah.
Not a problem because of her expertise.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and many tax preparers, even if they're using hourly as their source of how much they're pricing a tax return, most firms, even who do hourly, will really be doing an hourly based, where
Mhm.
they're adding up all the time that's involved on the tax return, and then they're going to compare that to what the tax return price was last year.
Mhm.
And if the total hourly adds up to less, they're going to charge the same price as last year or maybe a little bit more just because inflation and whatnot.
Sure.
And if so, it's sort of like as you have complex years, those are actually going to drive the price up in perpetuity. I'm just telling you how it is. I don't say it's right, but I think what you say about like we're willing to pay for it, we're loyal to this tax preparer, she understands our business. That that is absolutely common. That once somebody finds a tax preparer, it's kind of like a dentist. Once somebody finds a dentist that they're comfortable
Yes.
with, the likelihood that someone's going to change is really unlikely.
Yeah. Dentist or hairstylist.
Yeah, or
One.
that
You
too.
just
Yeah.
really don't change. Suresh has a question. How would you rate TurboTax for filing your own taxes as it is so user friendly?
Yeah, TurboTax in the do-it-yourself market is outstanding. And if you're comfortable filling out all the line items, even on the Schedule C for your business income, it goes through the interview. It'll ask you if you've had business miles. So for somebody who has the time and energy and capacity to go through that interview and use TurboTax, it's an outstanding option. And I should add, TurboTax now has a an add-on where you can actually get time with a CPA that Intuit has hired to go over your return. So I I know that in a way you would think I would um, not speak as glorious about TurboTax since it might be seen as a competitor. But what I've learned over time is that the TurboTax customer is really a very different profile from the one that's going to hire an outside third-party tax preparer. So, as much as many many tax preparers like to think that TurboTax is threatening and kind of taking over our market, in reality, the numbers do not support that hypothesis. We still have distaste for it, but you know, it's not founded in data.
Um, you were mentioning also talking about that, get me as many deductions as possible so I don't have to pay tax or anything like that. So
Yeah.
lowering the income as as at the end of the year and the problem with lending. And I've seen that happen. You go to a lender and yeah, you know that you're making lots of money, but because of the tax returns and the way they're prepared, uh, it just looks like you're not, so you don't get the money
Yeah.
just because of that.
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking in a way to see that for clients of mine where like I certainly can't say anything about wow, your cost of goods sold looks really high and why are you doing this business if it's not making that much money?
Mm,
Um, but but some businesses are starting out and can be not profitable like for good reason
mm,
that they're just starting out. So, but I think something gets confused where sometimes in the business owner's mind, it's like their objective is to make less money, and I can never understand that. I mean, I think if they knew the truth, if they really understood how the system works, and you want to make money, we don't want to pay tax, and I think that's the mentality that clouds it. But
mm.
tax is just it's just as it happens. So making more is always better. I've even had clients ask me whether making more money becomes a detriment to them. So there's definitely a lack of understanding out there about how tax works. Some people think too that like if I make over a certain amount, that all of my tax goes up to a really high rate, which is not the case. It's very incremental. It's typically not even, Doesn't even jump up. You can make 50,000 more dollars and as a percentage not really pay that much more tax. So, but there is, I mean, there's self-employment tax, which can throw things off, where you're paying 15.3% in addition to income tax. And I think that is an area that sort of clouds the picture.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Well, Bryce, this has been so valuable. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, as always. And thanks to the SBDC, which is a great resource, of course, to any business owner.
And we appreciate your support. You've given us a lot of support over the years. We appreciate it. I just put up there the upcoming slide, the slide with upcoming webinars. And there are so many, I could only get to September 3rd, but there's a bunch after that. And you can see Bryce is going to be joining us again. We have all kinds of topics. So if you want to register for any of those upcoming webinars, you can go to our website at the bottom, sbdc.nctc.edu, or you can use the QR code in the upper right-hand corner. That's where you're going to find the registration for the webinars. That's where you can get contact information, schedule an appointment with an advisor, and find some of the resources we already have on our website available to small business owners. We are grant funded, and because of that, I want to give a shout out to our benefactors, the Small Business Administration, the state of Texas, North Texas SBDC Regional Office in Dallas, and our host institution, North Central Texas College. Thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you next time. So have a great rest of your day.